So I've been playing a lot of Path of Exile recently, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that this game is all about compounding knowledge. Every time you play this game, you want to learn something you didn't know before, and that'll help you progress further and further until you finally beat the Voidstone bosses and can move on to the actual endgame. But as all PoE players know, the mountain of knowledge a new player has to climb to get past the campaign, into maps, and fighting those Voidstone bosses is rather large. I've decided that I would like to help with that new player knowledge, and seeing as though I've documented my entire new player journey on my YouTube channel, I figured it would only be right to give some pointers to help someone else get to where I am now. So without further ado, here are my top 10 pieces of advice I wish I knew when I started playing Path of Exile. First and foremost, Path of Exile's classes are mostly just suggestions. While in most RPGs a class would determine what spells or equipment you can use, or what skills you can master, in PoE you can choose any class and combine it with pretty much any skill, any weapon, and any armor type. Classes in PoE really only determine two things. They determine where you start on this massive skill tree, and they determine which ascendancy classes you can choose from. Ascendancies are extremely important, and will most of the time be the main component of your build. They provide extremely powerful buffs or focuses, providing a large portion of your damage and keeping you alive with boosts to your defenses. While your starting class doesn't necessarily lock you into a certain playstyle, it does determine how easy it will be to build your character a certain way. For example, Marauders have access to a lot of strength nodes, Witches have access to intelligence, and Rangers dexterity. So just keep in mind that classes have certain strengths and weaknesses, even if they technically can use any skill, equipment, or be built in any way. Second, and this is a big one, life is your health, and health is everything. Don't forget to build your defenses and build as much life as possible. This is an ARPG, and a punishing one at that. Any weakness in your defense will become apparent pretty quickly, and enemies will take advantage of it. Defenses will become the most important aspect of your build in most cases, so you need to make sure that you take enough life regen, armor, evasion, energy shield, elemental resistances, chaos resistance. Those are just the basic ones. These should be your goal for every single one of your characters regardless of your build. Now, based on your build, you can choose to favor armor over energy shield or evasion over armor or whatever you choose. Just remember that each one has its strengths and weaknesses. For example, armor is good for physical damage reduction, but can be easily passed by elemental damage if you don't have resistances. Evasion is good for dodging physical damage, but you can't dodge spells, and when you do get hit by something, you will get hit hard. Energy shield is kind of the supplement to either armor or evasion, basically adds an extra padding to your life pool, but can be bypassed by chaos damage. For me, armor is probably the easiest to build with. It is pretty straightforward to stack and does a flat, consistent amount of damage reduction. But armor is just the base. Once you get into endgame, you also need to think about spell block and suppression. You need to make sure that you have enough life and can deal with elemental ailments. Also, armor is really good at mitigating rapid small hits, but not big smash hits from bosses, so you still need to find a way to protect yourself from big smash damage. There are so many complex intertwining defenses you need to think about, but starting with the basics of building a ton of armor and elemental resistances has always helped me to get my defenses started. I will also mention, part of your defense is making sure that you can kill other things before you die. So it's not necessarily just focusing all on defense, but making sure that you do enough damage to bring down hordes of enemies before they can overwhelm you, or take down a boss before you make that one mistake and get deleted off the screen. So this might seem like a weird one to mention, but I promise this is something you should get used to when you first start because it'll help you so much later on. Controls are a given. First thing I always say in every video, make your left click to move only. Until you understand the game better and can use guard or movement skills as your left click, you don't want to be using your basic attack with your left click. It takes too much time, does no damage, then it'll screw up your mobility when you get overwhelmed and start accidentally clicking on enemies when you're trying to run away. Second, you need to make sure your keybinds are appropriate for your playstyle and need to be easily accessible. This means your skill bar, your second skill bar, your flasks, your menus, whatever it may be. Trust me, having a good setup with your keybinds saves you probably hundreds of hours of misclicking or dying because your movement skill button isn't committed to muscle memory, or you forget to turn on your auras because you forgot you put them on your second skill bar. Also, make sure you control and alt hover over with almost everything in the game. Most things will give you more information or some new info if you hold control or alt while mousing over them. In fact, you probably want to go into your settings and turn on the full item descriptions. There is so much information that a new player will miss if they don't keep this information on. And even though you may not completely need all the information to clear Act 1 or 2, you'll definitely need to start understanding what certain terms and stats mean by the time you're in Act 6. A couple more UI things to keep in mind. Your map overlay should be personalized to how you like it. You're going to be using this full map a lot. Navigation without it is so much more difficult, and the minimap in the corner is almost useless. This is more of a preference, but I like to turn on life bars for my character and all the enemies. This helps me to focus on what's in front of me and not have to look at the bottom of the screen in tough situations, and seeing how much damage you're doing to enemies helps you determine your true DPS against those specific enemies. You'll also want to start showing buffs and auras. Understanding how to manage your buffs and auras is crucial to building a viable character, so making sure you can see what buffs and debuffs you have affecting you at all times is an absolute must. In the future, this will help manage your skill and flask effects too. Speaking of showing all your buffs and auras, you're going to want to learn the basics of how to manage them and what they mean. The very basic buffs you'll use are your flasks. There are plenty of them that do different things, but as an example, I'll use this granite flask, which gives you an increase in armor for as long as the buff is active. The buff is active for a certain short time frame, which you can track by looking up at your buffs and debuffs in the top left corner of the screen. The granite buff can be extremely helpful in covering any lack in armor your build may have, and you want it up as much as possible. To do so, of course, you want to remember to use it, and use it often. You gain charges to all of your flasks by killing enemies, and once you have enough charges, you can use your flask again. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you can craft conditions onto the flasks to have them automatically be used when a condition is met. But for now, just practice making sure to remember to hit the button to actually use them. But on top of crafting conditions on them, flasks are fully enchantable, meaning you can use an Orb of Transmutation to make the flask magic, and then use Orbs of Augmentation and Alteration to get the modifiers that work best for your build. Flasks become extremely important, so you want to get in the habit of getting the most out of them early on. Next are aura and guard skills. These are a little bit more complex because each one can be crucial to different builds and completely useless to another. It requires a bit of knowledge to know which ones are best to use and how many you should use. Guard skills are a bit easier. These are dedicated defense skills that can help keep you alive in otherwise overwhelming situations. Guard skills like Molten Shell will give you a shield that will protect you for a certain amount of damage over time. Once the skill ends, you'll have a short cooldown before you can use it again. Just like flasks, you want to have your guard skill up as much as possible to mitigate as much damage as you can. The best part about guard skills is that they can be easily bound to your click to move button, so skills like Molten Shell or Arcane Cloak can be used every time your character moves. If the skill is on cooldown, your character will just move and use the skill the next time you click and it's off cooldown. Makes it a lot easier to have a high uptime on the guard skill. There will be certain guard skills that work in better situations and some that provide buffs or shields. You'll want to use one that'll be optimal for your build. For example, I use Molten Shell for this character since I'm building a ton of armor. Molten Shell scales with armor, so it gives me a bigger shield than someone who's building more evasion or energy shield. Last are the aura skills. These are skills that provide a persistent buff as long as you reserve mana to use them. Reserving mana basically means that you lose access to a portion of your mana in order to keep the buff active indefinitely. Example of these skills are Determination, which gives a strong armor buff, or Malevolence, which gives a large increase to damage over time. Aura skills are extremely effective, giving the strongest buffs to your character without a time duration that you need to keep refreshed. The part that makes them a little bit more difficult to handle is knowing how to optimize your mana usage, since you want to balance the amount of powerful buffs reserving your mana and the number of non-aura skills that rely on mana to be cast. The worst feeling is to have 75% of your mana reserved and then can't use any of your skills because you just don't have enough mana left. Obviously, this means you have to choose which buffs are most important to your build. Do you take the really strong 50% reservation one, or do you take two 25% reservations? Do you put passive skill points in mana reservation efficiency so you can use more auras, or do you use those points in other places and use less auras? It's completely up to you to figure out which ones you want to use, but to close this long section out, I will say this. Most endgame viable builds have at least one or two auras, a guard skill, a quick movement skill, and one health flask with 4 buff flasks that can be used as much as possible. Follow that template and you'll be set with any decent build at least to yellow maps. Trying to explain all of the types of crafting and all the different tips and tricks you need to know to craft efficiently in one video is absolutely not possible, so I won't do that here. There are plenty of people much smarter than me who can explain the math and build strategy on top of the different mechanics that GGG has put in place to help you craft the hundreds of different modifiers onto your items. As a new player, you don't need to worry too much about that, but the best thing to learn as a new player, and something I wish I had done when I started, is to craft as soon as you can and as often as you can. As soon as you open up your hideout in Act 2, you can access your crafting table. And while you may not have a lot of recipes yet, you can definitely save yourself a lot of heartache and currency by using the recipes you have. One of the best examples is the socket and color crafting. Using the crafting table, you can link sockets on your items guaranteed, instead of hoping for the best and using the Orb of Fusing currency itself. You can do the same with socket colors, making sure that you get at least a couple of the right colors on the item instead of rolling the dice with chromatic orbs. Once you get further into the campaign, you'll also unlock the recipes for putting life on your armor, certain damage on your weapons, and resistances on your gear. The resistances tend to be extremely helpful, since as a rule of thumb, you always want your resistances to be completely maxed out. So use your crafting to your advantage even at low levels. Yeah, it may be a good strategy to save your currency up for more powerful and necessary crafts later on, but if you can't get past the campaign because your defenses are lacking, you may need to bite the bullet and craft now. So this is kind of a contentious topic around the new player experience. Should you or should you not use a build guide to play PoE? I think the best advice I can give you is that the choice to use a guide is completely up to you. Guides are extremely helpful in making this beast of an experience seem a little less daunting, but it can also take away some of that feeling of accomplishment that comes with learning on your own. Like I said, it's up to you, but to help you make that decision, here's my take on build guides. PoE is basically separated into two games. Either you play without a guide and compound your game intelligence every time you play the game, or you play with a guide and arm yourself with knowledge so the only thing you have to do is play the game and follow some instructions. Now, a lot of people, including myself, will tell you to use guides to your advantage in sparing ways. When you first start the game, try to get through the campaign on your own. It's not easy to do, but it'll teach you a lot of the basics that you'll need to know once you get to maps. Creating that first character and trying out a build that you know is not optimal, but is just good enough to beat the campaign. Oh man, I can't even tell you how good it feels to accomplish something on your own in the game for the first time. After you've done that, when you're on your second character or you've hit a wall and you feel like the game is punishing you just for trying, that's when you follow your first build guide. A build guide will open your eyes to all the mathematical possibilities in Path of Exile's stat system, and more often than not, the guide will tell you why you're doing things. If you go to Maxroll or other similar build sites, just pick one that fits your fancy and try it out. Then, after looking at some of the build guides, maybe trying one of them out on a character, you'll feel much more confident in your Path of Exile skills. From there, you really only need to use build guides as a supplement to whatever build you want to make. And that's the basic opinion I have on using build guides. I personally don't like following a build guide to a T. Even if I'm failing, I'd rather fail on my own than succeed using someone else's solutions. But I will say that more often than not, if I'm struggling in a certain area, I'll look up information on the wiki or look at a random build guide so I'm not burning myself out and quitting the game. If you want to hear more about build guides or look at one that I think is best for new players, I have some other videos you may be interested in. I'll put the link in the description. Kind of like build guides, trade is one of the parts of PoE that's a little bit contentious. Some people really like it and think it's perfect the way it is, or it's about as perfect as it's gonna get while maintaining the quality of the economy. Other people dislike it and say it's a clunky system that is designed with barriers that sort of push people away from even getting involved in the economy. Personally, I feel I lean towards more of the clunky side, but I understand why. I made a video on trade going more in depth on why I feel it needs some changes. My mind hasn't changed too much since then, other than understanding why GGG has it this way. I still think they should make just a few changes though. But let me explain what the heck I'm talking about. In order to play Path of Exile with the most efficiency and cut down on all the heavy grinds, you may be interested in engaging in the trade system. But in order to do so, you first have to follow a few simple steps to set it up. If you'd like to buy something, you need to go to the PoE Trade website, where you can search for an item using these filters and click this button to message someone in-game, go to their hideout, and then hand over the currency for the item. And that's it. Yeah, it does mean you have to actively party up and travel to the seller to buy the item. Yeah, it does mean that the seller has to be in-game and willing to stop whatever they're doing to sell to you. Yeah, it does mean that the one person who has that one upgrade with just the right stats may not respond to you at all, but hey, at least being the buyer is not as bad as being the seller. To sell, you have to buy a premium stash tab with real money and set the tab as public. Then, whenever you set a price on an item in that stash tab, it'll appear on the trade site for people to message you. If you get a message from someone wanting to buy an item, you stop what you're doing, go back to your hideout, and wait for the buyer to come to you. I know I complain a lot, but once you get the hang of it, it's really not that bad of a process. It's inconvenient, which is the way that GGG explicitly says they want it to be, but whether or not you agree with the convenience of it all or buying the premium stash tab to sell items, the one thing that no one can deny is that trading with other players makes the whole game a lot more accessible and a lot less time consuming. As long as you know what kind of items you're looking for, you can buy literally anything from other players. If it wasn't for the barrier to entry of all this upfront tediousness, the economy itself would be probably one of the best in any ARPG. So these days, it's actually extremely common for games to allow mods or add-ons to assist players in-game or add extra content for them to enjoy. Sometimes, as is the case with Path of Exile, they become so ingrained in the fabric of the game and community that the add-ons become necessary to play the game. So here we go, add-ons are kind of necessary in PoE, and here are the two I feel are most necessary. First and foremost, you're going to want to get a loot filter. When you get to maps and start clearing huge packs of monsters with 50 to 100% increased quantity of items or more on a map, I guarantee that you're going to wish you had some way to clear this mess off your screen. I don't think it's too far off to say that it would be close to impossible to play this game at higher levels without a loot filter. If your eyes don't melt, your CPU will. So do yourself a favor and look at this loot filter guide that Schwingy made some time ago. It's really easy to follow, the loot filter is quick to download and use, and Schwingy is awesome. Link is in the description, but I'm going to move on so this video isn't too long. Next is Path of Building, POB for short. POB is a tool that PoE players can use to plan and follow builds. It's an absolutely amazing program, and I can't even begin to tell you how much work must have gone into making it. The amount of build customization power in your hands is insane. You can plan your next character's passive skill nodes one by one. You can look at all current uniques and randomly generated loot. It shows you all the stat modifiers that you'll be affecting with any change to your character. It's awesome. For a new player though, you don't really need any of that, or rather, you may not fully understand how to use it or want to invest time into it. That's totally fine. The real reason it becomes necessary is because it allows you to share and follow build guides. Most build creators or websites will give you a POB link. It's become the community accepted way to share build ideas, probably because it's the only way that you can properly pass all the information needed to help someone follow your build. Passive skill tree, equipment, gems, all of it will be here, and I guarantee you that while it's not impossible to follow a build guide without POB, it is definitely much easier. Either way, add-ons are a part of the game whether we like it or not, and the reliance on them will most likely not go away anytime soon, so you can decide for yourself if you feel the use of add-ons is worth your time to download and learn to use. The last two tips I have for you are kind of one piece of advice broken into two parts, and that is to be aware of how to manage the mental part of this game. First off, PoE is a massive game, full of content for you to enjoy, bosses for you to encounter, seasonal mechanics to try out. The worst thing you can do is try to learn all of it at once, and discourage yourself from continuing to play, otherwise known as PoE burnout. What makes this such a daunting task is that PoE is not very forgiving of your mistakes. Once you get to Act 6, you start to lose experience on death. This amount of experience you lose is calculated as a percentage of the total amount of XP you need to get from your current level to the next. This could mean that at higher levels, a single death can cost you an hour or two of killing monsters. On top of that, because a lot of PoE's gameplay and progression involves trial and error and RNG drops, you're almost guaranteed a couple of deaths. I mean, just on this character, I've died 127 times, and that's mostly just in the later half of map tiers. But here's what I'll say. When I finally accepted that this game was unforgiving and that death was an inevitable part of my progression, I realized that progression is almost inevitable as well. As long as you keep moving forward, keep playing the game, you will make progress. Whether this comes in the form of knowledge, currency, a new passive skill point, maybe getting lucky and finding the right drop, or finally beating that map boss to give you another Atlas point, it's all progression. You may not notice it at first, but your character will continue to get stronger bit by bit just by playing the game. So don't worry about learning everything at once or being efficient just yet. Even the campaign will teach you a hell of a lot that you'll need to remember once you get to maps. If you burn out on the campaign because you didn't want to take the time to learn and enjoy it, the endgame doesn't get any easier when you beat Kitava. You don't need to rush to endgame in PoE. The game will be plenty difficult up front and will be extremely rewarding at each step in your journey. Which leads me to my final tip for new players, the last and most important thing I'd like to share with a newbie coming in. Listen, you can do whatever you want. I'm not your dad or your doctor. I'm just telling you that in my experience, even as recently as this past season, I can get lost in the grind for PoE glory. I could spend days on end playing this game, trying to progress, feeling that sense of accomplishment for finally getting a character and SSF to the Voidstone bosses, but I know I really shouldn't. I've had to consciously keep myself from playing too much because I promise you, this game can get super addicting. PoE is a burnout-inducing game. It's not meant to be beaten in one go, it's meant to be a lifelong learning and progression experience. Every league, every character, you will learn something new and look back to the beginning of your journey and wonder how the hell your first character could have been so bad. I mean, trust me, when I first played this game, I thought it was an MMO and could barely get through the campaign without almost 400 deaths. And that's the other thing. You will die. You need to understand that death is going to happen, and it's not the end of the game. It is a healthy part of the progression process. Kind of how pain to the human body lets you know that something is wrong, death in Path of Exile is how you know that something is missing in your build, and you can focus on fixing that problem so you can continue your progression. The game can be incredibly frustrating. It can infuriate you to the point that you want to smash some keyboards or completely give up. There have been times where I have to skip entire leagues because it pisses me off so much, but after I recover and have some time to formulate a new strategy, I come back, and I try to get just a bit further than I did last league. So, remember to take health breaks. The game isn't going anywhere. If you're feeling the burnout, my advice is to leave for a bit, play another game, maybe in an entirely new genre, and just let yourself relax a bit before coming back to PoE. Hopefully when you come back, you'll start to feel that enjoyment of character customization and progression kick back in. Alright, I hope these 10 tips help you out at least a little bit. More important than any of these tips though is just the reminder to have fun. You can never play a game the wrong way if you are having fun. Veterans who are watching this, if there are any new player tips you think are absolutely crucial to give someone just starting out, put them in the comments below. But most importantly, I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you liked it and subscribe for more content. I hope you enjoy your exile, and I can't wait to see what we talk about next.